Hey everyone, welcome to this session. Today we have Nishu Goel with us. She is a Google developer expert for Angular and web technologies. She is also a developer at IBM. Today she will be taking a session on the world of web components, and I hope you enjoy it. Over to you, Nishu.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, and very welcome to the world of web components. I'm so excited to be taking this session. And yeah, as I was introduced, my name is Nishu Goel, and I work as a developer. I'll talk about my introduction on the next slide. Before that, I would just like to mention that since all of you have been participating in this HackOn Hackathon, it seems very interesting and exciting to me because I have been a student and I've been participating in hackathons and I know how nerve-wracking that is. So if it's still going on, all the very best to you and I hope you do good. So a bit about myself. I work as an engineer at IBM, a developer at IBM, and most of my work revolves around working on front-end technologies with most of my experience with Angular framework. I've been recognized as a Google developer expert in Angular and web technologies. And I also wrote this book, Step-by-Step Angular Routing, last year, 2019. So yeah, that's a bit about myself. And what today's session looks like is something like this. So I'll introduce you all to what web components are, why are we talking about those? We'll look at the different standards that we have in web components. Is it a entity? Can it be broken down or what? Then we'll also look at the technologies and frameworks that we use to build web components, to help use web components in other applications and all that. And finally, I would ask you this question, that why do you use web components at all? Because I believe after the first 3 steps of the session, you should be able to understand that why we need to use that at all. I would wait for your answers in the chat section that are there. And since it's a hackathon, right? How is it possible that we don't see some code or we don't do any code? So we'll try to accommodate that as well. I hope you enjoy this journey today. First thing, so when you're talking about the web, a very important thing to understand is what the web looks like nowadays, how it looks like in the current generation, right? So that's why I thought that it's very important to introduce you all to single page applications if you're not already aware. All of you, most of you might already know what single page applications are, but to understand it a bit better, let's go a little bit back and then try to understand it from the traditional perspective. So imagine when traditionally when we used to look at websites, we could think of HTML pages which are linked to each other. And when there's this website, which is a combination of multiple HTML pages, you would route to another view from one page, which is linking to the next page, right? However, that's multiple pages. And here, as we see, if we go literally with this term, single page applications, it means a single page. Now, for those of you who don't know what single page applications are, you might be wondering that it's a single page application and you would definitely not want a website to be a single page application, right? I mean, you would want that, for example, if you have a cart view, you would not want it to be on the same page as where your products view is, for example, if you're building a e-commerce website, right? So that's too literal of the meaning of the single page applications term. That's too literal a meaning. Now the difference here is it is a single page application, but there are actually multiple views to it. So that's that's the term that we use in single page applications. You route from one view to a different view, and it's not pages now. It's a single page application, which is like a placeholder for different views. So for example, if you click on one of the products and you want to go to the next view, which should give you the details of that particular product, that's a different view, not a different page, since it is a single page application. With that in our minds, we understand what SPAs are, what single page applications are, and we now know that there are many frameworks that we can use to build single page applications. We know we have been using JavaScript for building web applications. Angular is a very widely used framework that helps us to build single page applications. And it's not a mandate that you can only build single page applications, but then that's really how you put it best into use. Then we have React, we have Svelte, we have Vue, and many other frameworks that we use to build our applications, web applications. Now, you might be wondering that why so many frameworks when one would do the role, one would do the job. Then that's when so it was in conversation a lot lately, and that's when this term was coined, which is framework fatigue. And it's mentioned in this book called Web Components in Action. If you can see on the bottom right, this book really talks about that how different frameworks have been coming into play and almost just changing the ecosystem a bit, but doing the same thing after all. They just all of the frameworks help us to build web applications, and that's why this term was coined, framework fatigue, because you're really tired of keeping up with the different frameworks and being in a state when you're um, uh, you know going ahead in your career. You would want that the latest framework which is coming into the scope, and you would want to keep up with all the different things, all the different technologies, all the different frameworks. That's when it becomes very, very tiring to, for example, today I heard that okay, Angular is the best framework, and there's a lot of market demand for that. That's when you would want to go for that, but then the next day you might hear something else, some other framework. So that's why framework fatigue. But yeah, but that's when the role of that's when the idea of componentized web comes into picture. I mean, for example, you have one application, but then it has various components that you put in there in one application, and those don't necessarily need to be of one framework, because now it's your choice. Now you decide that okay, I think this color picker element is something I like better in Angular, which I've built in Angular, and I would want to use this one in my application. But maybe this calendar component is not something that I want to use from Angular, but from maybe React, right? That's when you pick up another component which might be built in React or Svelte or Vue, and then that's when you put it somewhere else on your view. This is why componentized web really helps you to build a vast application with more flexibility, more portability, more reusability. Those are a lot of terms, and I would ask you to remember all these. I mean, at least understand all these, because in the end, when I ask you that why do you use web components at all, these things might help you. So if you look at this picture, right, and you see one component, it can be reused anywhere else. For example, it's a product detail component, and you want to use it on the cart view also, because there also, like just like Amazon, you would want to show the details of the product again, that you have chosen this particular product, and this is the price of this product, and this is in your cart, and you can just check out from the cart. And that's where reusability comes into picture. So you can just pick up one of the component, place it somewhere else as well, where the where the styles might change, but then the purpose is same. So that's how componentized web really helps you. So if we look at it, for example, this is one project. Yeah, so I have removed this. This is one project which is an Angular project, let's say, and this is one project which is maybe some other framework. Now I want that, for example, this is something that I like in Angular, and I want that I place it in the other project. So I'll pick it up because now it's a web component and not really just a framework functionality. And maybe I want to place it here, somewhere here. I can place it, right? Like it's hidden right now, but yeah. So you could simply go and place this web component of yours in this other framework application. Isn't it amazing? I mean, web components would really help you with that. And this totally gives you all the flexibility to build your web application exactly as you want. And you can also call it, framework communication. You're communicating from one framework to the other just with the help of web components. I mean, that's not exactly the term you should use, framework communication, because it's not that easy. But then you are picking up one element, placing it in other element, and then it becomes just JavaScript. It's not carrying any framework functionality. For example, if I picked up 1 minute. Yeah, so for example, if I picked up this particular element, right, it was built in Angular, but then now when it's out of Angular, it's just JavaScript. It's just a web component custom element which can be registered to your DOM, and that's when you're using it in another element. Now you can't say that it's some other framework which you are using in other frameworks. It's just JavaScript after it comes out of its project. So that's one thing that you should keep in your mind. With after understanding this, now let's try to have a simple definition, more layman term definition of what web components would really help us to do. So this is a line that I've written for myself to understand it better. And I say that I want to take something that I'm interested in, that something that I like, and create a reusable piece out of it. For example, I like forms in Angular a lot, form validation, and I really want to pick it up. I want to make it reusable so that next time when I change my project and I get into a React project, for example, I can simply reuse that, and I should not have to, rewrite the form component which I created in Angular similarly in React. Right? You would not want to redo the effort when there's smartness all around. Why would you do something, repeated? So yeah, I want to take something that I'm interested in, and I want to create a reusable piece out of that, which I can share with the world, maybe my team at office, or just myself to use it in multiple projects where I need it. That's what portability of web components helps you with. Then we also need to have a look at the official definition of what web components are. So let's break this down. We'll read it line by line and then try to understand. So webcomponents.org says that there are a set of web platform APIs, which tells us that, okay, web components is not just a thing. It's not just, a thing which cannot be broken down, but it's a set of web platform APIs. So it comprises of some APIs that allow you to create new custom reusable. So yeah, let's understand this. So we are able to create new custom and reusable. So now we know reusability. We are picking it up and using it in other applications. Custom means what? We'll look at it a little afterwards, but for now you can understand it as something which is carrying your functionality, and you want to use that you want to introduce the DOM to it, your document object model to it, so that it understands what your functionality is, and you can implement that in the browser. The next line says encapsulated HTML tags to use in web pages. Encapsulated HTML tags. This is very important for now to understand. Think of your div element. Okay, it's just a div element, but your browser understands what a div element is. However, that won't be the case with your element, right? So you want to make something that browser understands, and it should be encapsulated. Now, encapsulated means that it should not leak out the styles and the nodes. Now, this is a very brief meaning of encapsulation. We'll go into the detail of what encapsulation is. The next line says custom components and widgets built on the web component standards. They work across modern browsers and can be used within any JavaScript library or framework that works with HTML. We have already discussed that, right? Whatever component that we build, we can use that across multiple modern browsers, and we can also use them in any JavaScript library or framework that works with HTML. Now, this is a very important thing when we talk about web component specifications. So as you saw in the last slide, web components are a set of web platform APIs. It's not one thing, but it's a set of some APIs. That's when these things come into picture. So when you're dealing with components, web components, right, these are the few specifications that you need to take care of. We'll understand these one by one. But if you look at it right now, it's HTML templates, shadow DOM, custom element, and HTML imports. But a very important thing to note here is that HTML imports was no longer supported by all the browsers. It was tried to implement it. So I'll introduce it right away here only, what it really means. So if you would have tried to use frames, iframes, and frame sets in your applications, you would have noticed how difficult it gets to import frames, iframes in your applications. And HTML imports was one attempt to do that, to import one document in another document. Now there was multiple iframes coming into picture, and that was not really compatible with all the browsers. So many browsers did not choose to support HTML imports, and that's when it was dropped off. It was no longer taken forward, and that's when we have HTML template, shadow DOM, and custom elements as the web component specifications. Let's look at these one by one. So the first is HTML templates. Now, if you have seen something like template tag in your HTML document, this basically means that you would not create a new DOM node for your whatever HTML you put inside template tags. it would actually create a fragment. It's like a wrapper around your whatever HTML you want to put in, and that would create a fragment. Now, what does a fragment mean at all? It basically means that it will be available only when you need it. It will be there hidden somewhere, but then when your need of the web component comes in, the document fragment will make it visible and your shadow root will appear. So we'll look at the browser as to how to do that, or actually we can look at it right now. So for example, there's any website or just here, and I want to inspect this. And if you see here, we can see that div is available here, the script tag is available here. But inside this, for example, this p tag, div tag, and this other div tag are all available. However, for example, I want that this particular div element, right? It should be a custom element. It should be a web component. And I don't want it to be available always to me. So what I would do is I would place this particular div inside the template tag so that it becomes a document fragment instead of becoming the whole document. Instead of getting attached to the whole document. So document fragments are the main thing. A wrapper is the main thing when we talk about templates. Moving on. Next is shadow DOM. Now, shadow DOM again is a very important concept of web component specifications. Now, let's try to visualize this a bit. For example, you're creating a web component, which is a color picker element, for example. Okay, and you have this consuming application, which is also a little bit about color picker elements. Now, when you place this particular color picker element, so if I write just here, if you create this color picker element, it looks something like this. And this particular element, right, it contains a class, for example, inside this, it contains a class called color class, right? And we close the div here. And you put this particular element inside your consuming application. Now, for example, this is your consuming application. And the holder of this color picker element, right? This also contains a class of the similar name, which is color class. How do you think this would be dealt? Because there are two classes with the same name. So if you do something like query selector and you want to fetch this particular ID, which is called color class, which one would be appearing first? Would the one which is present in the consuming app will be available, or the one which is there in your custom element will be available? Which is why shadow DOM comes into picture. So you don't want that confusion at all, and you want that this particular thing should be kept so secure, so contained, so isolated that it should not at all leak out of the application. And even if there's some other element with the same name outside, for example, this div and this div, and you want to get the nodes using again query selector all, and then you try to get all the divs, you don't want that this div should also go with this particular div. So you want to keep this isolated within its own. That's when shadow DOM comes into picture. So shadow DOM really helps you to encapsulate your nodes and styles. That's what I was talking about earlier. So if you look at the code part of it, there are two things: encapsulated DOM, when you're dealing with nodes, just like I talked about this div example, and scope CSS. The styling should be really scoped so that two elements with the same class name, which is very common to happen. I mean, you can name two classes, two elements with the same class name, right? It's not something a big mistake. You can do it every time, every other time you code something. And I know there's a way to handle this. You can mark everything as important so that it doesn't get overridden. But do you think that's very friendly? I mean, every style in your web component, you mark it as important because you don't want that to be overridden. You can do that, but then again, it's not very friendly. That's when shadow DOM helps you. You keep it inside this shadow DOM, and then no styles would leak outside. And I don't have an example of that currently, but just like we inspected here, right? If you have dealt with web components before, you might know that, for example, this div is my web component. This would be there inside. Let's edit it as HTML, and it would be inside this particular shadow root. this shadow root is created. And this shadow root means that everything under this is inside the scoped CSS and the scoped encapsulated DOM, that it won't leak outside to the whatever else is there in the body. So this div would not at all collide with this particular div. Why? Because it's inside shadow root, right? So yeah, this is basically what it means by encapsulated DOM and encapsulated styling, scoped CSS. That's what shadow DOM is all about. Then now we know that HTML imports are no more into the picture. So the last thing with this custom elements is the most important thing. Now you might be thinking that I'm calling everything important, but custom elements is the main thing over, on the top of which web components are built. Why is that so? So first of all, think of custom elements as a linchpin in the web component specification. Now, what does linchpin mean? It means something that's really holding very strong the whole foundation of the whole thing. So custom elements actually is holding the foundation of web components. Why is that so? Because this is actually a custom element. This is a custom element, and you register it to the DOM. You let the browser know that just like you're using this div element, use my custom element also, which I created, and treat it exactly how I've defined the functionality in my custom element, in my web component. So when you place this inside the browser, currently it won't understand, right? Because our browser doesn't know that there's something like this which exists in the scope, so it won't even consider that. And you might think that would it give an error when we place some element like this? Because it doesn't know. That's not the case. So the browser totally ignores what's there inside the element that we have placed, and it would be considered as HTML no element. I mean, there's no HTML element. So it will just move ahead to the next div because right now it doesn't know what my reusable component is. So you close this here, and now this thing is ignored by the browser totally. And after the body tag, it would just jump right away to the div content. It won't throw any errors. So this is how your custom elements work. Now you might be thinking that we need to register it to the DOM, right? How do we do that? That's when the code part of web components come into picture. And before the code part of it, let's have a look at what are the different frameworks and technologies that we can use to build web components, to build custom elements. And there's this very interesting website here. It's called customelementseverywhere.com, which makes sure that, as the slide says, that it makes sure that frameworks and custom elements can be best friends. So let's have a look at this website and see that whichever how many frameworks, how many technologies are there which allow us to build web components. Yeah, so this is the website. I'll share these slides with you, so if you're interested in exploring more of it, you can do that. So first result is of Angular. It tells that this Angular library, Angular frameworks, helps us to build components, web components, and the score in terms of the compatibility of a framework to build web components with it is 100%. The compatibility is 100%. So you'll see that a little later why Angular frameworks allows 100% building of web components. So easy in terms of handling the data, handling events. If anybody has been working with Angular already, you might know that how we use input and output for component communication, for passing in the properties and the events. Exactly the same way it works in any custom element that you create. So we'll have a look at that. Then it also talks about AngularJS. There's this library called DIO, which has 91% score. It also allows us to create components. Dojo is one. There's Polymer as well, Hyper HTML. Lit Element is by Polymer. It also is 100%. Now Lit Element, it's very flexible, right? It doesn't, I mean, you don't really have to carry a framework functionality when you're building a web component with Lit Element. So it's really a light web component that you would create with Lit elements because there's no dependency injection happening. There's no, change detection that you have to carry along. That's when Lit element, it really helps you build custom elements and very light custom elements. There are many other libraries that you can have a look at. Keep exploring this. Stencil is one. Again, the score is 100%. Stencil is also widely used. If you look at the INIC website, right? Ionic, it's all built with stencil components, stencil-based web components. Svelte also allows us. This also, the score is 100%. So yeah, you can have a look. Now the core part of it. So if you want to define a custom element, right? Just use a regular class which extends the HTML element. Why? Because HTML element is something that the browser knows. The DOM understands what an HTML element is. So if you put div in there, h1 in there, the browser considers it an HTML element, and that's when it registers it to the DOM, and that's when it can act like a div element. It can pour in the functionality of what a particular div tag should do. Similarly, for the same reason, we are using the search bar component, which is extending HTML element so that it behaves exactly how HTML element should behave. Once that is done, and you can define any functionality inside this class, then you need to define it and register it to the browser. That's done by using the define method of custom elements API. So you would simply do custom elements dot define. This is the selector name that you would give to your component. For example, you're using the color picker tag. In this case, it would be ng-search-bar. That would be the name of your custom element. That is something that would be registered to the DOM. That is something that you would place in the DOM, and that's when it will appear onto the browser. And this selector is for this particular component, which is search bar component. This should be same, search bar, and here also search bar. This should be similar, not two different things. Now, if anybody has been working in Angular or React already, you might know the concept of lifecycle hooks, right? When is your app initialized? When is it rendered into the browser? When are all the DOM nodes attached in the browser? All of those things. When is any change happening? All of those things are handled by lifecycle hooks, right? So custom elements also actually, fortunately, have lifecycle hooks in the name of reactions, which is why, if you remember from the previous slide where we were talking about the compatibility of Angular with creating frameworks, that's why it was 100%. Because if you look at it, it works exactly like the way lifecycle hooks in Angular work. For example, in Angular, you would have ng on init to initialize, to see whenever your app is initialized, what all should be present. Similarly, in this, we have connected callback. When all the DOMs are rendered into the browser, that's when this connected callback function is called. Similarly, in Angular, if you know ng on destroy, I don't know how many of you have been using Angular, but I'm using it as a reference because I'm assuming it would be easy for you to relate and understand. Disconnected callback is used when you remove the node from the DOM. It's how ng on destroy works in Angular. Then you have attribute changed callback. This works exactly like ng on changes. Whenever there's any change in the old value and the new value, this particular lifecycle hook or reaction, custom element reaction, is called, and this would update all the different values that you need to. In Polymer, if you use lit element, right, that's when you have different lifecycle hooks again. For example, here we have connected callback. In Polymer lit element, you would have first updated. That would call the first updated, just like ng on init and like connected callback. Then you have this method in lit element called request update, which always makes sure that you have this new value coming in. That works exactly like any change ng on changes or attribute changed callback, these lifecycle hooks. So yeah, this is a very vast, it's more in depth that you can read about it. You can go to the website of web components and read about lifecycle hooks, reactions. Now, if we compare these things with the frameworks that you've been using, for example, Angular, reactions are exactly compared to lifecycle hooks. Properties and custom elements are defined as input binding. If I just help you compare it right now in any of the Staglets example, for example, this is an Angular project, and if you look at it, for example, I have this hello component, right? I'll just make this a bit bigger so that it doesn't become tough for you to understand. So yeah, my hello component, which has hello selector, right? So I would place this here inside my app component, and this is where I want to specify the property of the hello component. So we do property binding here with the square brackets, and inside that we use any of the properties. Let's see what property do we have inside our hello component. We have this name property. So I can put that here. This is property binding, and I can give it any value. The value can be a string of whatever name, or let's call it hack on. This won't work right now because this is a web component project. So yeah, this is how you do property binding in Angular. Now it should relate to how we do it in web components. So we remove this. The only difference here is that you don't need property binding with the square brackets. The property would exactly, simply work like this. You write the name of the property, you give it the value, whatever name you want to give. This is how you do property binding in custom elements. Let me write both of these. This is custom elements. This is Angular, where you do property binding using square brackets, right? And string will come here. Yeah, so this is what properties are. Going back, we have custom events, which works exactly like output binding. When you want to send any output, any event from one component to another, that's when you have exactly the same way. We have custom elements, is custom events working in these custom elements. So for example, again, I use hello here and here as well. In Angular, what you would do is simply, using the name of your event here, let's call the event as foo, and you name the, whatever event you're using. And this would display whatever is there inside this function. Now, this is how we do it in Angular. Exactly the same way it works. The custom event, output binding, event binding works like this. This is the same. That's why if you can now notice how similar these things are, frameworks and creating web components, you will be able to understand that why it's so compatible to create custom elements and web components using these frameworks. Then we have attributes. So if anybody of you have created directives, right, in Angular, you might know what host binding is. So when you want to capture any property of an element which exists in the DOM, that's what we use host binding for. You'll be able to capture the property, make a change in its color or any of the styles, appearance, anything like that. And you can do that in custom elements as well, web components as well. I'm using these terms, custom elements and web components interchangeably because now you know that the foundation of web components, it all lies on custom elements, right? So there is a difference definitely, but it's almost the same thing. This is another, I've put it in pieces after some slides. What are the advantages of using web components? So again, this is a similar advantage, which is carrying your favorite functionality to other frameworks, and you can maybe carry some best thing of a framework to your Polymer element, some Polymer elements project, or you can carry anything from Polymer to any other framework. So it really helps you with that. This is a important thing in terms of when you're dealing with custom elements and web components, you need to make sure you are using all the polyfills. If you don't know what polyfills are, so you can think of it as there are some things which are not supported in the browser, right? Custom elements is not very widely supported. I mean, most of the modern browsers now support it, but you have to make sure that it exists, and your application mostly fails because of polyfill issues. When I was working for the first time in web components, I faced polyfill errors for a long time. So yeah, look at polyfills when you're dealing with custom elements and web components. And this is by Drupal, which also uses web components, using which we can also create web components. And they say that as a emerging web industry, web components are actually replacing the layout systems, template engines, and endless twig files. So you don't really need a lot of files to create one component. It's just an element that you need to place inside your template, and it should appear in the DOM if you register it. Now, as we have already seen the different technologies and frameworks that that we are using to create custom elements, First thing where we saw was on the website, which I told you, which was custom elements everywhere. You can look at all the different, websites, I mean, frameworks which are helping you create, this is not the right website, it's there in the slide anyway. So yeah, you can look at that, and we'll look at two main frameworks today. One is Polymer, which is widely used to create web components, and then we'll look at how to create web components in Angular. And we'll talk about both of these. Yeah. So if you look at lit element, right, Polymer is no more, in action. You basically use lit element and lit HTML. So for example, you're creating a new element, which in this example, for example, it's called simple greeting. And you want to extend lit element because you want it to behave like a lit element. Lit element has a lot of metadata, right, which allows you to create a custom element. So you simply created a class. Look at the third line first and understand that, firstly you created this class, which is called simple greeting, and it's extending lit element. Inside that, you're specifying a property. Now this property means, just like you use input, right, in Angular, you're using this name property, and the value comes in whatever you specified. And if you want to put in any HTML for your component, you can do that inside the render method, exactly how it is in React, right? So yeah, HTML, this HTML thing that you use here, you can import it from lit element. That's a lit element functionality. This property, this custom element, which you're using here to specify that. Now, just the way we use decorators in Angular, right? Before any class, for example, you have a class called export class app component, and before that you have this decorator, which is called @component. Exactly the same way we use custom element, @custom element, and the name of your custom element. This is again a decorator which contains a metadata for your class to understand that how it should behave, what is the functionality of it. And if you place it in any of your HTMLs, this is how you can use it. You can simply use the name of the web component, which is now called simple greeting, and pass in the property. So remember we talked about property binding. It's simply using the property, whatever is there, and giving it the value. So now the name property value will change to everyone. And you close your tag, custom element, and it registers in the DOM. To have a look at how we do that in Angular, I have a demo which we'll go on to a bit later. Yeah, this is the demo that you can also use actually for your reference. You can note it down if you want to, play around with it. It's there on Stack Blitz. I'll talk about that in the end. I mean, we'll look at the code in the end. Now you might be wondering, right, that even if I show you a lot of code today, how would you be keeping up with it? How would you really, try it when you go back? So for that, I've actually created a code lab. It was long before that I created this code lab, and I thought it would be the best use for you. You can actually go on to, hop onto the website and try creating your own custom element, your own web component, and then use it in, whatever projects you're working in. So this is how it looks, the code lab. It has the overview section, which gives you an overview of what web components are, what this web component code lab is all about. Then the prerequisites to know before you start with creating web components, the setup, web component specifications, which we talked about today. If you do that with Angular, you can use custom elements, how to create that. Now this is not very vast to contain all the different frameworks and technologies. The below part of it, the 3-4 sections inside this code lab contain Angular's way of creating custom elements. So you can create custom elements with a package in Angular, which is called Angular Elements. You can build your web component, and then the last 3 sections again would be general. I mean, it would be the same with whatever framework you use. So now the next step would be for you to publish your component to NPM if you want to share it with the whole world. So you can share it on NPM. This particular section would include everything that you need to know before you want to push it to NPM registry. And then you can also see how to use it in other frameworks. And finally, I've put in all the links of the source code, which is there in the GitHub repositories. So yeah, you can refer to that as well. The link of it, I'll share it in a while. This is the code lab link. So this was created for a conference called NG India. So that's the name. I didn't change the host name. So you can take it just like that. I'll also share it with the host, and we can share it inside the chat section with you. This is the repository link where I created a framework agnostic search bar. It basically means that it doesn't really care about the framework which I've built it with. And this is a search bar component, which I originally created with Angular, but now you can use it in any of the frameworks you want to. It's a search bar component that, it's a very common component. You might need it in many, almost, every third application, right? So yeah, you can use it. And this is one example of how to create it using Angular, but then now it's framework agnostic. Then there's this example of actually using it in other frameworks. So I pushed that also to GitHub. You can try that. This is the repository which contains, using this search bar component in a React project. This would be a React project, and in a vanilla JavaScript project as well. So if you don't want to use any framework because framework fatigue or anything like that, then you can use something. You can use it simply inside a JavaScript project. Before moving to the resources, let's go to the demo and see. Yeah. So there are two basic things that we need to understand how to create, web components in Angular. So we are not displaying this app.component.html. Why? Because we are bootstrapping. Bootstrapping means, what do you want to launch what do you want to start when your application is launching. So there's a change in that because we have created a web component here. First of all, if you don't know the structure of your Angular application already, for now, just try to understand that this is one app component which contains 4 files: the CSS file, the HTML file, the component file, the module, which is a container of all the different components and pipes and directives that you're using. And then we have this new other component, which is actually our web component today. So yeah, let's look at these one by one. This is the CSS file. We don't need to care about that right now. This is our HTML file, which has just a hi written in there. But since we are not launching this at the startup of the application, we don't really need this as well. Then we have this component file. If we look at it, this is our main app, which should be, which is the app component, app root component. And it has a property called name, which has the value Angular. And then this is something which we should look at today. This is our app module. So if I close this, so usually if you've worked with Angular before, you might have seen that, we have a bootstrap array, which bootstraps the component that you want inside your startup application, right? And when you bootstrap that component, whatever is in that component will appear. But now, since we bootstrap this component, we have manually implemented a bootstrap method. ng-do bootstrap is a method which helps you manually bootstrap whatever component you want. If you don't want, app component or any other component to be bootstrapped by Angular. So first of all, we'll look at this ng-do bootstrap method. So you're creating one element called ELE, and create custom element is a method that comes from the package Angular elements. So if you see here, create custom element is imported from Angular/elements, which is a package in Angular. So you get this method here, you define the component which you want to create as a web component. If you have any dependency injection in there, if you're dealing with any services or API calls, that's when you can use injector. And now, if you remember from when we were discussing about custom elements, we also need to register it to the DOM, right? So we are using the custom elements API just like before, and we are using the define method inside that, giving our component the name of the whatever we want the browser to understand, and the reference, the instance of our created component, which is ELE. That's what we have created, right? So this LE component should come now inside the browser. And the other thing that you can look at is before Angular 8, right? Before Angular 9 actually, you would have to use entry components array to define whatever component is actually not an Angular component. It's actually a dynamic component or a web component, custom element or something like that. That's when you would need to tell the Angular compiler that, hey, this doesn't have a template as such, but it might appear at some time. So be ready to welcome it. So that's when entry components were helping you with it. There was no so I mean that's a deep dive in Angular concepts like ng factories and all that. So let's not discuss about that, but just understand that we would need to define that inside the entry components array if you're creating a web component. However, starting Angular 9, you don't really need to do that because we have this new rendering engine called Ivy, and with that we don't need ng factories to be created, and which is why we don't need entry components array at all. The other thing that you should look at is the component itself. It looks a simple component. The selector is hello, and the template simply looks like hello, and the name comes from a parent component of the consuming application. In this case, the consuming application is Angular, and the name property is coming by input binding from the parent component, which is app component. It has the name. You can specify any name here. And then if you go back to this, yeah, the styling also you can inline. It's better to keep a single bundle of all the templates and stylings because you don't want to create many different files for your web component, which you might want to push to npm. You would want just a single bundle to be able to push it to npm, right? These are the main things you can think about. You can remember entry components, you can remember bootstrapping the array, and the third thing is this particular component whose property should be coming from the consuming application if you want to communicate between the consuming application and your web component. And if you look here now, you might be thinking that I didn't use this selector somewhere at all, anywhere at all, right? We should use this so that we understand where it is used. Now, I don't want to use it inside Angular because it's an Angular component. Yeah. So I don't want to use it inside Angular, but we have this index.html file, right? So I've used my component here. So remember, we gave this my comp to be for the browser to be able to understand. My comp is something that we defined in the app module when we were bootstrapping the component. This is here. So my comp should now refer to the custom element that we created, which is hello component. So if I go to the index.html now, I'm defining this my component here, my comp here, and the name should get its property from whatever we define here. So forget this. That's right. And now it's communicating with your, with your consuming application. In this case, consuming application is a single HTML file, which is index.html. There's no Angular here. It's just a single HTML file, which is using the name of your component, which you created in Angular. If you remember, these are all the files which are Angular files, and we created this component there, and you are displaying that onto the browser. It's a regular HTML code. So yeah, that's how you can create custom elements using Angular. The last bit about is the resources that would be really helpful for you if you want to dive deeper into what web components are, what custom elements are, how to use different frameworks to create custom elements, and what are the standards, and what is the deep down what is the foundation of all these specifications that they have created. I mean, how was Shadow DOM initialized at all? How was custom elements created at all? Who created it? All of that is the best mentioned on this third link that you see here, developers.google.com. It contains all the web fundamentals and talks about different specifications. This one is just about custom elements, but you'll see more about Shadow DOM and template and everything there. This video is the video by Angular Elements creator Rob, so you can check it out too if you're interested in creating web components using Angular. This second link that you see here, it talks about all of Angular elements. And the first link, it's actually a book, a very good book, Web Components in Action. We also talked about it in the beginning when we were talking about framework fatigue being a term which is mentioned in this book. So yeah, it's an interesting book. It talks about all of the web components, how they started, why they didn't succeed in the beginning, then how they came into picture, and how the world is moving towards web components. And I think that was the main reason I chose to give this presentation the name The World of Web Components. So yeah, I think that's it from my side. I would thank you all for being great listeners. And my name is Nishu Goel. Again, you can connect with me on Twitter at this weird-looking username, D Costa Wilson. And this is my blog, nishugoel.wordpress.com. So if you want to read my blogs mainly around Angular and web components, then you can go to my blog. That's it. There are few links in my slides. I'll share these slides with you, also the links with you. I think I can share the code lab link at least with you right now in the chat section. It should be here. And yeah, just to mention all the questions that you've been mentioning in the chat, I've just looked at them right now. So let me see if I can take all the questions right now. This is the link to the code lab. I'll also give you the link to the standards example. This is in the demo, this one. So you can fork this and you can use it inside your local or in your own Staglet and then try to run it. I look at the comments now and stop sharing my slides. Just want to know if there are any questions because there's a lot of messages and I can't really see if there are any questions.
Someone asked, can you explain the Redux framework? Is it related to the web components?
Anything, any questions that people have asked in the live comment section?
Yes.
I'm
So Arun asked, can you explain the Redux framework?
Redux is something that's not the scope for today, and Redux framework is a vast thing. So I don't think it's a good idea to get into that right now. But if you are not at all aware about that, then I would suggest you read more about state management, and you read about actions, reducers, and how to pass the action from a store to a reducer. So yeah, there's a lot of terms in there.
And someone
But
has
yeah, that's
asked,
an interesting thing to consider when you're dealing with state management.
Okay. And someone has asked which IDE you were using. IDE.
With IDE, I was using.
Yes.
So since it's not a local IDE, there's this browser-based IDE mainly for Angular. You can also use Code Sandbox or Code Pen. For right now, I was using Stackblitz.com. Let me paste the link to it also in the chat section. Called Stackblitz.com.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I don't think so. Though participants can ask you questions on Discord channel. So everyone who is attending the session can ask Nishu directly on Discord channel. We have shared the link on the chat section, the link to the Discord channel. And I guess that's it. Thank you for this wonderful session, Nishu.
Yeah, thank you. I just saw one question which says, is it necessary to learn PHP? So, Melvin, Samuel, it's not necessary. There's nothing necessary as such. It always depends on your requirement, right? So if you have a requirement for PHP and if you have a passion to learn PHP, then you can do that. But it's not very much into action, right? These days, the market is not demanding for PHP. But then, yeah, as I said, if it's your project requirement or your interest to learn that, you can definitely do that.
Very
it's
awesome.
not
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So thank you for this session, Nishu, and we hope you had an amazing experience with HackOn team. So that's it.
Oh, that's a lovely experience. I hope the audience also enjoyed it, and it was a good experience too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.